And we are live. I really hope the mic is picking up everything. Seems like it is. How we doing? Keep it moving. Supposed to be coming in through the blue snowball, so still got to take care of the decoration stuff in the background here. We're getting settled into the new place, and instead of me having all that office to myself, it's going to be the office on one side and my wife's sewing room on the other. So if the camera was pointed this way, you'd see I've still got my Mayflower passengers poster up over there and my American flag behind the desk and a bunch of other knickknacks and paraphernalia. But maybe I can talk my wife into putting up some of my posters on her side of the room. We'll see. Anyway, today is Mayflower Day. On this date in 1620, the Mayflower set sail in earnest from England to North America. It was a voyage fraught with difficulty. They made a couple of mistakes. They goofed here and there. The ship broke halfway through. Initially, two ships left. It was the Mayflower and the Speedwell, but the Speedwell had to turn around and go back to port, citing issues with hull integrity. They were taking on water. There were a couple of theories about this. It had apparently just been retrofitted with a bigger mast so that it could take on more sail, but that mast taking on more sail on a hull that was comparatively smaller led to the mast kind of putting too much torque on the hull, and that caused seepage, which caused the ship to take on water. But there is also a more prevailing and dominant theory that the captain was kind of against the voyage to begin with. And so when they went back after initially setting sail in early July, they were delayed for quite a while, and it got to the point where the Mayflower Pilgrims didn't want to delay too much longer. They didn't want to miss their shot at making it to the New World at all. And so they piled as many people as they could, and they still had to leave a couple of them behind to cross the Atlantic at what was close to the worst time of year. And if you're new to this channel, maybe this is new information to you. If you've joined in the last year and a half or so since the Mayflower Pilgrims video kind of gave me the following that I have, this is information you've heard me talk about before. What I wanted to focus on today was a list of books that I've read over the last couple of years that have formed the basis of my education on this subject, as well as a recent one to enter the collection. So if you clicked on the stream, you saw a picture with a bunch of book covers on it that I put together for the thumbnail. I'm going to read them off here just because I'm not tech savvy enough. I haven't figured out how to immediately share my screen with you yet. It doesn't say how to do that here, and it's not really something that I've farted around with a whole lot. So I'm just going to read off these titles to you. The first one that I've got right front and center is Mayflower by Nathaniel Philbrick. This is the book that took the story of the Mayflower and turned it into a narrative for me that helped me to understand the lives of the main drivers of this ship's voyage. William Brewster, William Bradford, how on earth am I going to brain fart that guy's name, right? Miles Standish and others. He showed their lives leading up to the decision to go to the New World, their years in Holland, and why they decided to go there. And then it takes them all the way through to King Philip's War 50 years later. It explains the friendship that the Pilgrims had with the local Wampanoag Confederacy for a while, but one that ultimately deteriorated into the conflict that was called King Philip's War. Can't recommend that book heartily enough. A good, strong 5 stars to it, and it really makes these people come alive to you. One of additional value is directly to the right of that one, The Mayflower and Her Passengers by Caleb H. Johnson. That's where I've got the bulk of the information that I used when I broke down the Mayflower Passengers poster. Some of the figures in this, I want to say story, but that feels wrong because a story can be something that was invented. Account is the right word. Some of the figures in this account have more information on them than others, generally because they were the ones that survived and later went on to fulfill leadership roles in the plantation and in the colony over the next several decades. Others will be a little bit more sparse. Sometimes they were just people that died off. In fact, I would say in most cases it was people that died. Other times they were youths. Some of them went back later to England and didn't stick around to really make a mark in the plantation. Others on the poster, for example, and I'll throw a link in the description to that as well. The poster's available over at thehistorylist.com. I'm not sponsored by them or affiliated with them. I just thought it was a great poster, and if you wanted to get a copy, that would be where to do it. But on the poster, they've got age ranges listed for some of the passengers. It can vary as much as by 5 to 10 years. Maybe this guy was 10, maybe this guy was 20, but they understand that passengers were generally assumed to be of age if they were signatories to the Mayflower Compact. They were close enough to adult age that they could sign their names to that and be part of the community. To the right of that, I've got A Stranger Among Saints. It was about Stephen Hopkins. It's written by Jonathan Mack. Stephen Hopkins was not one of the members of the religious congregation for the Mayflower. He was what was called a stranger. He was a guy who was there more for economic reasons. They'd hired him on to kind of be their guide in the New World because he had experience in Jamestown. I did a video last fall just about that book, and so I recommend you read it for that reason. Over on the left side of the thumbnail, I've got The Pilgrim Hypothesis by Timothy Ballard. If that name sounds familiar to you, he's a former special forces operator who then went on to start the Operation Underground Railroad group that fights human trafficking and saves people from sexual slavery. He's also got a PhD in history and left a cushy intelligence job in Washington to start OUR and somehow find time to write these big, deep historical treatises on the side. The Pilgrim Hypothesis is the third in a series of hypotheses books. There's also one that he wrote about George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, talking about the role that they played in the foundation of the country or big changes in the country in case of the Revolution for Washington or the Emancipation Proclamation for Lincoln. The Pilgrim Hypothesis, while it is mostly about the Pilgrims, it seems like Ballard was also trying to touch on a couple of other formative moments in the history of North America, post-Columbian times. He wrote a little bit about Christopher Columbus, as well as a little bit about the founding fathers. So you get some before and some after the Pilgrims. I feel like there might not have been enough material for him to write as substantive of a book on Columbus or on the founding fathers, the way that he had done with Washington and Lincoln. So he put them all together here, largely because a lot of the events surrounding all three of these periods kind of overlapped into one big, complicated, but integral web that forms part of the American story. But I would highly recommend you check that one out. Of Plymouth Plantation, I did a live stream last Thanksgiving to talk about that one. It was a manuscript discovered in mid-1800s, penned by Bradford himself, who was governor of the plantation for a good 3 decades. So the guy was very well entrenched in the operations of the plantation and the relationship that they had with the Native Americans next door. To the left of that, I've got the Mayflower Voyagers video featuring the Peanuts characters, Charlie Brown and them. My kids and I, we all sit down and watch that one, every Thanksgiving, along with the Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. We've got all the holiday specials and stuff, but we watch this one as well because, in addition to it being a good childhood throwback and a Charlie Brown cartoon, it's also got a lot of historical accuracy in it, a lot of detail that you don't generally find in children's cartoons. Definitely more accurate than stuff you would find on the History Channel, I'll tell you that much. So I recommend that. And then the last one I'm plugging here, well, let me talk a little bit about the image in the bottom right there. That's a drawing that I did, which strangely was the thing that set this all in motion. A couple of years ago, I had this kind of joking idea I was saying, we've got all these Christmas books, we've got Halloween books, but we don't really have Thanksgiving books. So what if I wrote this epic where you had the Pilgrims and the Indians teaming up against giant mutant turkeys or something, because that's how my brain works. Anyway, I eventually got around to doing homework on the Mayflower passengers and the history of it, so that I could get enough of the details right to shape a story around that. And this thing ended up taking on a life of its own, learning more about the Pilgrims and the true history of it all. I found that to be a lot more interesting than any narrative that I could spin out of it. And as I was writing the book, which I called Answerable Courage, I struggled to finish it just because I felt like I was putting words in the mouths of these real people that were, their struggle became very real to me as I read more about them. I've got to get a little bit more comfortable with historical fiction before I write more things of that nature. But that drawing there in the bottom right corner, that's a mock-up I did of Miles Standish and Samoset as they go to war against a bunch of giant mutated animals that would ultimately end up on the Thanksgiving table. I've written better things, but I still think that was a fun picture to do. Final book I'm going to mention out of the thumbnail is 1620 by Peter W. Wood. Subtitle is A Critical Response to the 1619 Project, which is a project that's gotten a lot more traction in the national consciousness over the last couple of years, especially as it has received funding and backing from the Department of Education and school boards across the country. It is a project that's kind of had me staring at it from a distance and thinking some of the claims they're making in here are ahistorical. It's more about changing a narrative than it is about presenting new facts or even presenting old facts in a new way. It's more about just trying to get people to embrace an idea about history that doesn't stand up to scrutiny. And it wasn't the kind of thing that I ever had the time to sit down and write a long post or a long brief about. And then when I saw this book come up in the Claremont review of books, I was like, okay, I'll give this one a look and see what Wood's research turns up. It is by no means a comprehensive repudiation of the project, but it definitely tackles what I think are the most glaring errors within the narrative that it tries to put forth. And he even goes a step further and does some research on the author and the people backing her to kind of expose what their motivations were, mainly that it's kind of a grift. The whole point is to get funds, to get backing. It's a sad thing that we've seen a lot more in the open in recent years, that movements that kind of build themselves on addressing racial or historical grievances are often just a cash grab and don't really solve the underlying problem that they claim to care about addressing. But in the midst of that critical response to the 1619 project, Wood offers a lot of very valuable context and insight into the activities of the Mayflower Pilgrims and the role that they played in the formation, ultimately, of the United States of America, even though they would arrive here 155 years before the American Revolution would get underway. So that's the list of books I would recommend on this Mayflower Day. As a final note, I just want to remind you that the calendar that the Pilgrims were using 400 years ago was different than the one we use now. It has since undergone an adjustment, the full details of which I don't know. I just know that the reckoning they use was about 10 days off from the reckoning that we use now. And so according to them, they left on September 6th, but the day that they left on our own calendar today is actually September 16th. In that same vein, though they arrived in Cape Cod on November 10th, they did, technically get there on November 20th. And though the compact, it says, was signed on the 11th, it was actually the 21st now. So just one of a million things that I find interesting as I dive more into this subject. So thanks everybody for watching. I hope you're liking this. I appreciate you guys watching the videos of late as you have. And now that this is over, I will get to adding the links to the description so you can find these books if you are so inclined. Thanks. Drive safe. See you out there.